The world knew him as an icon, the face of professional wrestling, the hero of millions, the larger-than-life figure who body-slammed his way into the history books. But what the public never saw, what he never wanted anyone to know, was what lay hidden behind the walls of Hulk Hogan's private Florida mansion. And when news of his shocking death broke, it didn't take long for federal authorities to step in. Within hours, the FBI descended on the property, acting on sealed warrants and insider tips that had been sitting quietly in the shadows for years. What they uncovered inside left even veteran agents stunned. Why was the FBI already watching Hogan's estate long before his passing? What secret vault was found hidden beneath the main floor of the mansion? And what dark chapters from his past, long buried beneath fame, sweat, and silence, suddenly roared back into the spotlight? This wasn't just another celebrity investigation. What the FBI uncovered wasn't just shocking, it was potentially criminal, disturbingly personal, and deeply connected to the demons Hogan spent decades trying to outrun. From private journals locked in a fireproof safe, to surveillance footage never meant to see the light of day, and cryptic letters from figures in the wrestling underworld, the findings painted a portrait of a man whose public persona was only half the story. The truth? Hulk Hogan's final years were far more complicated than fans ever knew, and now, the world is finally seeing what he worked so hard to keep hidden, until it was too late. In the hours following the unexpected announcement of Hulk Hogan's death, tributes poured in from across the globe. Fans mourned the loss of a wrestling legend, a cultural icon, and a larger-than-life persona who had inspired generations with his strength, charisma, and resilience. But while the public was still reeling from the news, something far more secretive was happening behind the scenes, something that had been quietly set in motion months earlier. At precisely 4:17 a.m., under cover of darkness, a team of FBI agents arrived at Hogan's Clearwater Beach mansion, armed with a sealed federal warrant and strict orders from higher up. This wasn't a wellness check or a routine sweep. It was a targeted federal investigation, and the late wrestler's sprawling estate had just become ground zero. What had once been a home filled with memorabilia, neon lights, and echoes of Hogan's signature catchphrases was now being treated as a potential crime scene, and the agents weren't there to pay respects. They were there to find something, and fast. Sources close to the investigation confirmed that Hogan had been under quiet federal scrutiny for nearly a year before his death. It wasn't public, and it was never leaked to the press, but a whistleblower, reportedly from within the entertainment industry, had tipped off authorities about a series of offshore accounts, encrypted communications, and references to a hidden archive within Hogan's home. The tip was strange, even vague, but enough for the feds to begin quietly building a case. And now, with Hogan gone, they no longer needed to wait. The agents moved swiftly through the mansion's main halls, using infrared scanners and forensic gear not typically seen outside of high-level intelligence operations. What were they looking for? And why was Hogan's name linked to encrypted files, secret safe rooms, and hidden corridors that even close friends didn't know existed? As it turns out, Hogan's mansion had more than just luxury finishes and wrestling memorabilia. Behind a false wall in the upstairs office, agents discovered a concealed staircase, a narrow, soundproofed passage leading to a basement vault. It was built into the original construction, but never included in any of the property records. The vault door was reinforced with steel and secured with biometric access. Hogan was always known for his privacy, but this was something else. Inside the vault, agents found what can only be described as a digital and physical archive of Hulk Hogan's secrets. Dozens of external hard drives, multiple safes, and over 200 handwritten journals lined the interior. Some documents were labeled with phrases like confidential settlement, WWF NDA breach, and most puzzling of all, black file, do not release. It wasn't just wrestling history stored in that room. It was a labyrinth of decades-old decisions, partnerships, and possibly cover-ups that Hogan had clearly never wanted anyone to find. Federal agents immediately secured the drives and began a chain of custody process reserved for highly sensitive material. Unconfirmed reports suggest that several items were marked for national-level review, meaning the contents could involve individuals or institutions outside of Hogan's personal circle. In other words, this wasn't just about Hogan. It was potentially about people who had used him, paid him, or tried to silence him. The more the FBI uncovered, the clearer it became that the legend of Hulk Hogan was only one side of the story. And the man behind the mustache had spent years guarding something far more explosive than anyone ever imagined. What federal agents discovered inside Hulk Hogan's secret vault didn't just rewrite the final chapter of his life, it shook the foundations of the carefully polished legend he had spent decades constructing. This wasn't just memorabilia or personal keepsakes. It was a collection of carefully documented secrets, meticulously preserved and encrypted with the kind of paranoia usually reserved for intelligence operatives, not aging wrestlers. Inside one fireproof safe, agents found over a dozen USB drives and solid-state hard drives, all labeled with cryptic initials and date ranges going back to the late 1980s. But it was the handwritten index, titled simply Black File, that raised the most eyebrows. This wasn't a journal. It was a map of allegations, coded references, and internal documentation spanning decades of the wrestling industry. Celebrity alliances, financial settlements, and shockingly, deep personal betrayals. Sources close to the investigation say some of the drives contained unedited footage of private meetings, including conversations with other major wrestling legends, managers, and media executives. Some clips included off-the-record agreements, private grievances, and confidential settlements that, if leaked, could tarnish more than one beloved figure. But it went deeper than that. Investigators also found signed non-disclosure agreements, some tied to Hogan's infamous legal battles, others connected to incidents the public never knew about. There were references to Project Angel, an untraceable code word repeated multiple times in both digital files and handwritten notes. No one knows exactly what it refers to, but it appears linked to a series of quiet payoffs and sealed legal actions stretching from Florida to California. Even more disturbing were medical files, including scans and prescriptions, some not Hogan's. These were names unknown to the public, possibly victims or witnesses, some redacted by Hogan himself. Why would he hold on to these? Some believe Hogan had started building his own insurance policy, a collection of leverage in case anyone ever tried to ruin him again, the way he nearly lost everything during his battles with Gawker and other media giants. Among the most explosive revelations was a journal entry dated November 2014, written shortly after his private tapes had been leaked to the media. In it, Hogan wrote, "They want to destroy the myth. I let too many people in. Never again. From now on, I document everything. If I go down, I'm not going alone." That entry alone sent shockwaves through the Federal Review team. It painted Hogan not as the clueless victim many believed him to be, but as a man fully aware of the enemies closing in and determined to protect himself by any means necessary. This wasn't paranoia. This was strategy. And while some of the files have yet to be decrypted, initial leaks from within the investigation suggest that at least 2 well-known television executives and a retired promoter are directly named in documents tied to unlawful financial activity, hush money transfers, and intimidation tactics. As this hidden archive unravels, it's becoming clear that Hulk Hogan was not just guarding memories, he was guarding power. Power that may now fall into the hands of federal prosecutors, journalists, or worse, the public. His legacy, once defined by red and yellow tights and roaring arenas, now teeters on the edge of a much darker story. A story of secrets, survival, and the high-stakes cost of fame. And with every unlocked file, the world is beginning to understand that behind the poses, the catchphrases, and the media comebacks, Hogan was hiding a truth he knew would eventually be discovered, one way or another. As federal investigators continued to sift through the hard drives, handwritten files and sealed records found inside Hulk Hogan's private vault, what had begun as a mysterious post-mortem inquiry quickly escalated into a full-blown web of influence, manipulation, and betrayal that spread far beyond one man's mansion. What shocked even seasoned FBI agents wasn't just the volume of material, but the names that kept surfacing in connection with it. Names from the upper tiers of the wrestling industry, names tied to high-powered talent agencies, television networks, and even certain figures in politics. The files were riddled with cross-referenced initials, bank transfers, metadata timelines, and whistleblower testimonies, most of which had never seen daylight until now. One folder was simply labeled, "Payroll, and it allegedly detailed off the books monthly payments made to at least 4 individuals who were later identified as former crew members and security contractors, people Hogan once claimed never worked for him. Why would they have been receiving recurring hush payments? That question alone has already sparked multiple subpoenas. One of the most disturbing discoveries involved a 2012 audio file, hidden deep in an encrypted drive, in which Hogan could be heard referencing a cleanup job after an alleged off-site incident involving a minor celebrity and a now-defunct wrestling promotion. The audio, while still under forensic review, has raised serious concerns about whether some of these alleged NDAs were used not just to cover embarrassing personal details, but to suppress legally questionable activities. Another name that kept surfacing in connection with these black files? A well-known retired wrestling executive who is still affiliated with several mainstream sports broadcasting deals. Insiders say he's already hired a legal team. Behind the scenes, quiet panic has begun to ripple through boardrooms. These aren't just old stories being dredged up. They're potential time bombs that, if made public, could collapse careers, end partnerships, and pull entire corporations into the blast radius of Hogan's posthumous revelations. And yet, as investigators dig deeper, another layer begins to reveal itself, the emotional one. Buried between legal documents and financial records were dozens of letters never sent. Letters addressed to people Hogan once trusted, loved, or fought bitterly with. Some were scathing, some heartbreakingly vulnerable. There was one to his son, apologizing for the years lost to fame and ego. Another, unsigned, written to someone referred to only as L, simply read, "I never told the truth about what happened. Maybe someday someone will." These weren't the words of the real American persona fans remembered. These were the tortured reflections of a man who had become a prisoner in his own empire, haunted by what he knew, what he did, and who he had become to survive. Outside the walls of his mansion, the public narrative of Hulk Hogan is starting to shift. News outlets are cautiously reporting the FBI's findings, while legal teams scramble to prevent leaks. Wrestling insiders who once praised Hogan are going silent, and others, especially those who were forced out of the industry in silence years ago, are finally beginning to speak up. Some say they always knew there was more to Hogan's story. Some say they're still afraid to share what they know. But one thing is clear. Whatever was inside that vault has set a reckoning in motion. Hogan may be gone, but the secrets he left behind are very much alive, and they're starting to burn their way through a world that thought it had already told his story. In truth, that story is only just beginning. In the weeks leading up to his death, Hulk Hogan's world had grown strangely quiet. He canceled several public appearances, citing routine health matters, and postponed interviews that had been months in the making. At the time, most fans believed it was nothing serious, just the toll of age and years of physical punishment catching up to the once invincible wrestling icon. But those closest to him now admit that Hogan knew something was coming. He had become more withdrawn, more cautious. He'd begun speaking in vague, cryptic phrases, telling old friends to look after things, and even whispering to one longtime associate, "If I go first, they'll know where to look." The chilling reality is that Hogan may have anticipated his death, or at least the chaos that would follow it. And in his final days, he took meticulous steps to ensure that everything he'd kept hidden would finally come to light, even if it destroyed the mythology he'd spent a lifetime building. Inside his private office, just a few feet from the concealed stairway to the vault, investigators discovered a sealed letter addressed to the truth. It wasn't written to a person, but to the idea itself, a kind of confession or manifesto. In it, Hogan wrote, "For years I played a part. They wanted the hero, so I gave them the hero. But I kept the real story locked away, because the real story would have killed the dream." That sentence alone changed how many investigators viewed the case. Hogan hadn't merely hidden secrets. He had deliberately curated his own downfall, leaving behind clues and triggers that would activate only after his passing. According to FBI sources, Hogan's estate had been updated just 2 months before his death, granting conditional access to a digital failsafe, a remote server with backup files and correspondences, set to notify selected recipients if he failed to log in for more than 14 days. When the system detected inactivity, It automatically released a limited set of documents to his legal team and, more importantly, flagged a dormant case number tied to an ongoing federal inquiry. Hogan, in effect, was controlling the narrative from beyond the grave. But why? Why not go public while he was alive? The answer may be found in the tone of his final writings. One journal entry read, "They still have power. If I speak, they erase me. If I'm gone, they can't stop what comes next." Some believe Hogan feared retaliation, not from fans, but from the very institutions he had once relied on. Major media networks, private wrestling financiers, and even certain law enforcement liaisons who, according to files recovered in the vault, had been paid to suppress incidents tied to multiple personalities in the sports entertainment world. Hogan wasn't just scared of scandal. He was scared of being silenced before the full story could surface. So he waited. He compiled. And in what may be his most shocking move of all, he turned his own death into the catalyst for a reckoning. Now, the wrestling world finds itself reeling, not just from the loss of its most recognizable figure, but from the unraveling of an empire built on performance, loyalty, and carefully concealed truths. Hogan's name will never be viewed the same way again. Some will say he betrayed the trust of fans. Others will call him a hero for finally breaking the cycle. But whether you believe he was a mastermind, a victim, or both, one thing is undeniable. The man behind the muscles left behind more than a legacy. He left behind a warning. The truth was never in the ring. The truth was in the silence between cheers. And now, as the FBI continues its investigation, the final chapter of Hulk Hogan's life may be the one that echoes the loudest.